감사합니다. 오늘 이렇게 많이들 와주셔서 자리를 빛내주심을 진심으로 감사드립니다. Good evening, everyone. It is my honor and great pleasure to introduce Mr. Earl, the Superintendent of Montgomery Township Schools. He has been dedicated to educating the next generation of leaders in one of the top-rated school districts in our country. About a year ago, I had the pleasure of getting acquainted with Mr. Kim. And it was very clear to me at first sight that Mr. Kim was the ideal keynote speaker for this gala. His integrity and values are admirable. His experience as an officer in the Marine Corps, a teacher, an assistant principal, a principal, and the superintendent of schools is an inspiring testament to the next generation of our community. He is a fourth-generation Korean American. His family history is a microsome of the whole Korean immigration history in America. For someone like me, who is a 1.5 generation Korean American, knowing Mr. Kim is like seeing the future of my Korean American generations to come after me. Without further ado, I present Mr. Earl Kim to you.
Thank you all for such a warm welcome. My second only to Chung Beck in getting me prepared for tonight, continually reminding me that deadlines were coming up, was my stepmother, who's sitting right up here. And my stepmother said, make sure you start off with something in Korean. Well, being a fourth-generation American, son of a third-generation American who speaks no Korean, that was a tough challenge. So I'm embarrassed to say that the only Korean I know is Shinji Chapsuseo, which for those of you who are like me means time to come to dinner. Okay. For the record, let me say that when Chung Beck first called to ask me to speak today, my response was, I think you want to invite my brother. He's the doctor. It is truly an undeserved honor to be with you here this evening, to speak to such a distinguished group of people. Each of you has accomplished so much more than I. You're successful business people, you're scholars, you're doctors, lawyers, you're elected officials, leaders in your community. And I am just a teacher. And I don't know that there's anything that I can share with you tonight that would motivate such a remarkable group of people any more than you already are. On the contrary, it's you who've inspired me. You've shown me what a small, committed group of people can accomplish. That they can make a vision become a reality. In the span of 4 short years, KCCP has raised the funds necessary to secure a parcel of land in West Windsor, its future home. And I personally wish to thank the founders of KCCP and you who supported the vision for having the courage to act on a dream and for having the staying power to see the project through to its completion. That's truly inspiring. And I also wanted to thank the friends of KCCP, President Rosansky, Mayor Jun Choi, Mayor Shu, Superintendent Niwa, Reverend Moffat, and other distinguished guests, because you didn't have to attend tonight. So your presence bespeaks your commitment to the diversity of this community and the diverse cultures of this wonderful state. So in keeping with tonight's theme, my charge is nothing less than to inspire you, at least to share in the inspiration that comes from being with such a wonderful group of people. And having spoken with many of you previously, I know that you need no inspiration. You have achieved so much already. You've given more freely of yourselves than I ever have or could ever aspire to. So my aim tonight is much less grandiose. My aim tonight is merely to remind you and to get you to make an outrageously large donation to continuing the work of KCCP. I'd like to do this by telling you a story, and not just any story, but a story about yourselves. Each of you knows Henry Koo Kim. Now, his name may not ring a bell. You may not recognize his face, with its rather prominent nose and longish ears. Perhaps you know him by his courtesy name, Sa-ok, or one of his many aliases, Hyung-gu, Sa-yun, Mun-sam, or Song-jin. On the other hand, perhaps not. But I think you know Henry Koo Kim. You may not know, as I did not, that as a young boy in Japanese-occupied Korea, he was educated in traditional Confucian studies, reading classic works of literature, politics, ethics, and the like. You may not know that in 1906, he would be enrolled in a, quote, private school in Seoul for the purpose of pursuing modern or Western knowledge. You may not know that while in Seoul, he participated in and helped to organize a student movement for an independent Korea, a Korea free from the rule of others. You may not know that in 1909, he would leave his beloved homeland on a mission to secure American and European support for an independent Korea. From Seoul, he traveled to Vladivostok, to Harbin, Manzuli, to Moscow, to Warsaw, to Holland, to Southampton, and finally to New York. You may not know that he arrived in the United States in 1910 at the age of 21 and would eventually join other expatriates like An Chang-bo, Park Young-man, and members of Daihan Hanin, Kuk Min-bo. In a quixotic 35-year quest for Korean independence. You may not know that he traveled to Hastings, Nebraska, and graduated from high school while attending the Korean Young Soldiers School at Hastings College. You may not know that, like many of his cohort, he continued his education and eventually graduated from college. That must be Cornell during the summertime. You may not know that he married, was appointed chief of mission to the United States and Europe, or that he served as editor of a couple of periodicals, the Kungmyeonbo and the Pacific Weekly. You may not know that following Korean independence in 1945, he was forbidden from returning to the homeland by his rival, the first president of the Republic of Korea, Syngman Rhee. You may not know that he was blacklisted while in the U.S. by the FBI during the Red Scare, in part due to his opposition to American intervention in the Korean War, and in part due to his editorial attacks on U.S. ally Syngman Rhee. He could not secure employment except as a night watchman. He would pen his memoirs in the quiet of the night of the American Can Company in Kaka'ako, Hawaii. You may not know that he long held out hope for a return to his homeland. He retained his Korean citizenship for over 50 years and renounced it only after his first trip back to Korea in 1961, after Syngman Rhee had passed on. The country he had loved and served so faithfully over the decades was in his mind no more. You may not know that in his retirement, he would sit in the living room of his sparsely furnished, cramped, concrete block apartment on Lime Street, smiling silently as he watched his grandsons play on the cold tiled floor. Unable to speak, his vocal cords removed due to the ravages of cancer that would eventually consume him. This lumbering giant of a man would just sit and smile and delight in the things that a 5-year-old just couldn't understand. You may not know that when he passed in 1967, his grandchildren would only know him as that gentle, silent giant of a man with a big nose and wrinkly ears. A grandfather like any other, except with no past and no story to be told. I moved on with my life. I left the islands as soon as I could. College, the military, teaching, and graduate school. I was eager to escape the confinement of our life in Hawaii and the semi-nomadic lifestyle that led us to 6 homes in 17 years. My grandfather became a distant memory as my life marched on. I only learned of my grandfather's story in 1995, some 15 years after I left Hawaii, when the Korean government asked for permission to exhume my grandfather's remains from his Honolulu gravesite. It was then that I first read his now published memoirs. It was then that I learned about the Korean independence movement in the United States. And it was then that I first appreciated all that my grandfather gave for that in which he believed. For the first time, I came to know Henry Koo Kim. In 1995, when he was reinterred at Daejeon National Cemetery for generals and patriots, along with 4 other leaders of the Korean independence movement, my grandfather's wish to return home was at long last granted. I believe that Henry Koo Kim had another dream. It is, I believe, the reason that he wrote his memoirs. And it is the same reason that KCCP seeks to build a community center. It was his way of sharing with his children and his grandchildren an important part of their history. It's through his story that we understood that he had lived a special life, and we began to understand our own. Each of you knows Henry Koo Kim. He is your grandfather, your grandmother, your father, and your mother. He is a Kim. He is a Ruzansky, a Newell, a Moffat, We all have a Henry Koo Kim in our lives. People who've given us a presence and a place in this world, who serve as our compass, who have inspired us each and every day to live the lives that are worthy of theirs. And to paraphrase President Lincoln, the world will little note nor long remember people like this. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated to the unfinished work which they, our ancestors, who fought here so nobly advanced. It's our duty, as the living, to finish the work that our Henry Koo Kims began. So I am personally indebted to the founding members of KCCP and you in the audience tonight for allowing me to share my story tonight, and more importantly, for providing a place in which all our stories can be told through the ages. As my dear colleague, who's not with us here tonight, Russ Walsh, continually reminds me, teaching is storytelling. And it's from the stories that we tell that we understand ourselves. But more importantly, it's through our stories that we express new idioms of what we might become. It is from these stories that our children learn that which is important in life and the measure of their success. So I challenge each and every one of you here tonight to give to KCCP in proportion to the sacrifices of those who have come before you, to those who have given so much to each of us. Thank you very much.